The early morning sun cast long shadows across the busy Los Angeles International Airport as 85-year-old Clint Eastwood walked through the main terminal. He moved with the same quiet strength that had made him famous in westerns and action movies many years ago. Today he wore simple clothes, faded blue jeans, a light gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A small travel bag hung from his shoulder, containing just what he needed for his trip to New York. Clint was traveling to scout locations for his newest movie project. After 60 years in Hollywood, he still loved making films that told important stories. This new project was special to him, a story about an old war veteran finding peace. He had been thinking about this story for years, and now it was finally happening. Most people in the busy airport didn't notice the legendary filmmaker walking among them. That was how Clint liked it. Fame had never been important to him. Making good movies was what mattered. At the Pacific Airways check-in desk, a young woman with bright red hair greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. May I see your ID and ticket, please?" Clint handed over his documents with a polite nod. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood," she said, her eyes widening slightly as she realized who was standing before her. "We're honored to have you flying with us today." The woman typed quickly on her computer, then frowned at the screen. "Is something wrong?" Clint asked, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had commanded attention in countless films. "I'm not sure, sir. The system is showing something unusual with your reservation. Let me call my manager." Clint waited patiently as the woman spoke quietly into a phone. After a few minutes, a tall man in a dark blue Pacific Airways uniform approached. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Keith Benson, the gate manager," he said, extending his hand. "It seems we have a situation with your first-class ticket." "What kind of situation?" Clint asked calmly. The manager looked uncomfortable. "Our system shows that your first-class seat was reassigned due to an overbooking situation. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we'll need to move you to economy class for this flight." Clint's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago, first class, paid in full." "Yes, sir, I understand," the manager said, not making eye contact. "Sometimes our system makes automatic adjustments when we have VIP passengers or loyalty program members who need special accommodation." "And I don't qualify as a VIP?" Clint asked, the hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The manager looked flustered. "Of course you do, Mr. Eastwood. It's just that, well, our system works on specific parameters and sometimes mistakes happen." A small crowd was beginning to form around them. Some people were taking out their phones, recognizing the famous actor in this uncomfortable situation. "So you're telling me that someone more important needs my seat?" Clint asked, his voice still calm but firm. "Not more important, sir," the manager said quickly. "It's just that we have some corporate clients who have agreements with the airline for guaranteed first-class seating." Clint looked at the manager for a long moment. In his younger days, playing characters like Dirty Harry, he might have made a scene. But at 85, Clint Eastwood had learned that there were better ways to handle situations like this. "I see," he said finally. "Well, I'd like to speak to someone in charge." "I am in charge of gate operations, Mr. Eastwood," the manager said, standing straighter. "No," Clint said quietly. "Someone actually in charge." The manager's face reddened. "I'm afraid our regional director isn't available today. This is a busy travel season and these things happen. We can offer you a $200 travel voucher for your inconvenience." Clint looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers. Some were filming the interaction on their phones. He didn't want to make this a bigger scene than it already was. With a slight nod, he made his decision. "Keep your voucher," he said. "I'll take the economy seat." The manager looked relieved. "Thank you for understanding, Mr. Eastwood. We appreciate your flexibility." As Clint walked away with his new boarding pass, he heard the manager say to the check-in agent, "He's just an old actor anyway. Probably hasn't made a movie in years." The comment stung, but Clint kept walking. He had directed and starred in a film just last year that had earned 3 Oscar nominations. But clearly that didn't matter to Pacific Airways. 2 hours later, Clint found himself squeezed into seat 34B, a middle seat in economy class. On his left, sat a large businessman who had already claimed both armrests. On his right was a young woman in her 20s who kept stealing glances at him with wide eyes. "I can't believe they put Clint Eastwood in economy," she finally whispered. "I'm Maya, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Maya," Clint said with a genuine smile. "Sometimes life puts you exactly where you need to be." As the plane took off, Clint watched the flight attendants fawn over the first-class passengers. Through the thin curtain that separated the cabins, he could see a young tech executive lounging in what should have been his seat. The young man looked bored and entitled, barely acknowledging the flight attendant who served him champagne. The economy cabin was a different world. Flight attendants moved quickly, their smiles more forced as they dealt with the crowded conditions. When the beverage cart came, Clint asked for a simple water. "That'll be $4, the flight attendant said without looking at him. "You charge for water now?" Clint asked, surprised. "Basic economy policy, sir," she replied, finally looking at his face. Her expression changed instantly. "Oh my goodness, you're—" "Just an old man who's thirsty," Clint said with a wink, handing her a $5 bill. "Keep the change." The flight attendant looked embarrassed. "Mr. Eastwood, I didn't realize. Please, the water is complimentary for you." "No," Clint said firmly. "I'm in economy class. I'll follow the same rules as everyone else." Next to him, Maya seemed impressed. "Most celebrities would be throwing a fit right now," she whispered. "I'm not most celebrities," Clint replied, and making a scene never solved anything important. As the 5-hour flight continued, the discomforts of economy class became more apparent. The seats were narrow, the legroom minimal. When the person in front of Clint reclined their seat, it nearly hit his knees. The bathroom line stretched down the aisle, and the single meal option had run out before the cart reached their row. Yet through it all, Clint remained calm and observant. He noticed how people treated each other, how the airline staff interacted with passengers, and how different the experience was from first class. He took mental notes of everything he saw. "You're handling this really well," Maya said after a particularly rough patch of turbulence sent a flight attendant's cart into Clint's elbow without an apology. "I've had worse days filming in the desert," Clint said. "Besides, I'm getting some good material." "Material?" Maya asked, curious. "For stories," Clint explained. "Everything is material for a storyteller, even bad experiences." As he looked around, the crowded cabin watching people squeeze past each other, enduring the small indignities of modern air travel, something began to form in Clint's mind. Not anger at his treatment, but the seed of an idea. A story about class divisions, about respect, about how people treat each other when status and money come into play. By the time the plane began its descent into New York, Clint Eastwood had the beginning of a new movie idea taking shape in his mind. It wasn't the location scouting trip he had planned, but it might turn out to be much more valuable. What Pacific Airways didn't know was that they hadn't just bumped an old actor from first class. They had given one of Hollywood's most successful filmmakers the inspiration for his next big project. And that project would end up costing them much more than the price difference between economy and first class. It would cost them $500 million. The New York skyline came into view as the plane began its final approach. Clint Eastwood looked out the small window past Maya, watching the famous buildings grow larger. Despite the uncomfortable 5-hour flight in economy class, his mind was now fully awake with new ideas. "So what brings you to New York?" Maya asked, trying to make the most of her remaining time sitting next to the Hollywood legend. "Location scouting for a new film," Clint replied. "Or at least that was the plan this morning." "And now?" Maya asked, noticing the thoughtful look in his eyes. "Now I might have a different story to tell," he said with a slight smile. As the other passengers prepared for landing, collecting their belongings and turning off electronic devices, Maya took a deep breath and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small business card and handed it to Clint. "I know you must get this all the time," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I just graduated from film school. I'm trying to make a documentary about how ordinary people are treated by big companies. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about what happened today? It would mean so much to me." Clint looked at the simple card. It read, Maya Rodriguez, documentary filmmaker, with a phone number and email address. There was no fancy logo, no company name, just a young person trying to break into a tough business. What's your documentary about exactly? He asked, genuinely interested. Maya's eyes lit up. It's called The Invisible Customer. It's about how big companies treat regular people when they think no one important is watching. I've been collecting stories from people who've been mistreated by airlines, banks, insurance companies, places where there's a clear divide between VIP treatment and everyone else. The plane touched down with a slight bump and the cabin filled with the sound of seatbelts unclicking. That sounds like something worth talking about, Clint said, pocketing her card. Tell you what, I'm staying at the Carlton Hotel. Why don't you meet me in the lobby restaurant tomorrow morning at 9? We can talk about your project over breakfast. Maya's mouth fell open in surprise. Really? You'd do that? Why not? Clint said. I've got some ideas of my own after today. The next morning, Clint sat at a quiet table in the hotel restaurant, sipping black coffee and jotting notes in a small leather notebook. He had been up since 5 a.m., unable to sleep as ideas for a new film kept flowing through his mind. The airline incident had triggered something in him, a story about respect, about class divisions, about how people treat each other. At exactly 9 a.m., Maya walked into the restaurant, looking nervous in a simple black blazer over jeans. She carried a worn laptop bag and a small digital recorder. Clint waved her over. Good morning, Mr. Eastwood, she said, still seeming shocked that this meeting was actually happening. Clint, he corrected her. Have a seat. I ordered some breakfast. For us. As they ate, Maya shared her story. She had graduated from NYU Film School 3 months ago. Her documentary was her passion project, but no one would fund it. She was working as a barista during the day and editing footage at night. The airline ticket to Los Angeles had been a splurge. She had gone there to interview a former airline executive who had agreed to talk about customer service policies. The problem is, Maya explained, no one cares about this issue until it happens to someone important. Regular people get treated poorly every day, and it's just business as usual. Clint nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Until yesterday, I hadn't flown economy class in probably 30 years, he admitted. I had forgotten what it's like. That's exactly my point, Maya said excitedly. There are 2 different Americas, one for the rich and famous and one for everyone else. As she spoke, Clint could see her passion and talent. She reminded him of himself when he was young, determined to tell stories that mattered, regardless of the obstacles. What if, Clint said slowly, forming the idea as he spoke, we told this story together? What do you mean? Maya asked, confused. I've been thinking about a new film project, Clint explained. A drama about an aging business mogul who gets bumped from first class and ends up sitting in economy. During that flight, he sees how his own company treats regular customers, and it changes him. It changes how he runs his business. That sounds amazing, Maya said. But what does that have to do with my documentary? What if we did both? Clint suggested. I make my film, which would be fiction but inspired by real events, and my production company helps fund your documentary, which shows the real stories. Maya stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? Dead serious, Clint said. My company, Malpaso Productions, has the resources to do this. Your documentary could be the perfect companion piece to my film. 2 sides of the same coin, fiction and reality. Maya's hands were shaking. Mr. Eastwood, Clint, I don't know what to say. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. Say yes, Clint replied with a smile. And then we can get to work. Over the next 2 hours, they outlined both projects. Clint's film would be called Economy Class, a drama that would use his experience as a jumping-off point for a larger story about corporate responsibility and human dignity. Maya's documentary would feature real people sharing their experiences, including Clint's story about Pacific Airways. The key, Clint explained, is that we never directly name the airline in my film. We create a fictional company that just happens to have very similar practices. But in my documentary we can name names? Maya asked. Your documentary will be about facts, about real people and real companies, Clint said. As long as everything is true and can be proven, yes, you can name names. By the time they finished breakfast, Clint had made several calls to his production team back in California. Things were moving quickly. He had canceled his location scouting appointments for the day and instead asked his assistant to set up a meeting with his regular screenwriter. I can't believe this is happening, Maya said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. Yesterday I was just a struggling filmmaker with a dream, and today I'm partnering with Clint Eastwood. That's how life works sometimes, Clint said. One door closes and another one opens. Pacific Airways closed a door when they kicked me out of first class. And now you're opening a door for me, Maya said gratefully. No, Clint corrected her. We're opening a door together, and on the other side is a $500 million lesson for companies that forget who they're really serving. As they walked out of the hotel, Clint put on his sunglasses and looked up at the bright New York sky. For the first time in years, he felt the same excitement he had experienced as a young director. A new project, an important story to tell, and the chance to help a young filmmaker along the way. Pacific Airways had no idea what they had started when they bumped him to economy class. But they were about to find out. 3 weeks after the flight incident, Clint Eastwood sat in his spacious office at Malpaso Productions in Los Angeles. The walls were decorated with movie posters from his long career, from the early westerns like The Good, the Bad, and The Fall, ugly to recent successes like Gran Torino and American Sniper. A large window behind his desk offered a view of the Hollywood Hills. On the desk in front of him lay the first draft of the economy class screenplay. His trusted writer, Tom Wheeler, had worked day and night to get it done quickly. Clint had just finished reading it, and a rare, wide smile spread across his weathered face. It was good. Very good. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called. His assistant, Jennifer, opened the door. Maya Rodriguez is here to see you, Mr. Eastwood. Send her in, Clint said, standing up to greet the young filmmaker. Maya entered the office looking much more confident than she had in New York. The past 3 weeks had changed her life completely. After their breakfast meeting, Clint had immediately put his team to work. He had set up Maya with an office at Malpaso, assigned a producer to help with her documentary, and provided a budget that allowed her to quit her barista job and focus entirely on filmmaking. Good morning, Clint, Maya said, shaking his hand firmly. I brought the rough cut of the first interviews. Let's see what you've got, Clint said, gesturing to the comfortable leather chairs arranged around a large screen on the opposite wall. For the next hour, they watched Maya's footage. She had interviewed dozens of people about their experiences with big companies. A senior citizen who had been denied medical coverage on a technicality, a family who had been bumped from their flight and forced to sleep in an airport overnight, a disabled veteran who had been ignored by bank employees while wealthy clients were ushered into private offices. And at the end, there was Clint himself, telling the story of his experience with Pacific Airways. He had insisted on being interviewed, just like any other subject, no special treatment, no fancy lighting, just the truth of what had happened. This is powerful stuff, Maya, Clint said when the video ended. You've got a real talent for getting people to open up. Thanks, Maya said, beaming at the compliment. But I couldn't have done any of this without your help. No one would even return my calls before. That's Hollywood, Clint said with a shrug. Talent isn't always enough. Sometimes you need a door to open. He picked up the screenplay from his desk and handed it to Maya. Take a look at this when you have time. I'd like to know what you think. Maya took the script with reverence. You really want my opinion? Of course, Clint said. This whole project started because we sat next to each other on that flight. We're partners now. As Maya left with the script, Clint's phone rang. It was Gary Walters, his longtime producer. Clint, you're not going to believe this, Gary said, his voice excited. I just got off the phone with Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was one of the biggest movie stars in Hollywood, known for commanding $20 million per film. What did he want? Clint asked. He heard about economy class and wants to play the lead, Gary explained. And here's the crazy part. He's willing to work for scale, says he loves the script and wants to be part of something meaningful. Clint nodded to himself. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen. What about the others? Same story, Gary said. Sandra Alvarez wants to play the flight attendant role. Michael Chen is in for the corporate executive. They're all willing to work for minimum rates. This movie is becoming the hottest project in town, and we haven't even officially announced it yet. This was unusual in Hollywood, where big stars typically demanded huge salaries. But Clint had built up decades of goodwill in the industry. Actors respected him and wanted to work with him, especially on a project that had a powerful message. That's good news, Clint said calmly, though inside he was thrilled. Let's lock them in and start pre-production next week. Over the next few months, both projects moved forward quickly. Maya traveled across the country, gathering more stories for her documentary. Clint focused on preparing economy class for production, working with the screenwriter to perfect the script and meeting with his design team to create the look of the film. One morning, as Clint was reviewing the production schedule in his office, Jennifer rushed in without knocking. "Mr. Eastwood, I think you should see this," she said, handing him a tablet with a news website on the screen. The headline read, "Pacific Airways stock drops 8% as rumors of Eastwood film spread." The article explained that word had leaked about Clint's new project, and though the film never mentioned Pacific Airways by name, industry insiders knew it was based on his experience with the airline. Investors were nervous about potential negative publicity, especially given Eastwood's influence in the entertainment world. "Should we make a statement?" Jennifer asked. Clint handed back the tablet. "No statement, we're making a movie about a fictional airline. If Pacific Airways sees itself in our story, that's their problem, not ours." Later that day, Clint's phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. "Clint Eastwood," he answered. "Mr. Eastwood, this is Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Pacific Airways," a smooth voice said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "What can I do for you, Mr. Reynolds?" Clint asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I recently became aware of your unfortunate experience on one of our flights," Reynolds said carefully. "I wanted to personally apologize for the way you were treated. It was completely unacceptable." "I appreciate the call," Clint said. "I was also hoping we might discuss this film project you're working on," Reynolds continued. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to talk about how Pacific Airways might be portrayed." Clint smiled to himself. So that was what this call was really about. They were worried about the film. "Mr. Reynolds, my film is about a fictional airline called National Sky. Any resemblance to real companies is coincidental." Of course, Reynolds said quickly. "But perhaps we could still meet. Pacific Airways would be interested in discussing a partnership opportunity. Maybe we could sponsor the premiere or offer technical assistance for the aviation scenes." "I appreciate the offer," Clint said firmly. "But we like to maintain our creative independence. I'll have my assistant send you tickets to the premiere when the time comes." Before Reynolds could respond, Clint ended the call. He had no interest in making deals with Pacific Airways. This film wasn't about revenge or money. It was about telling an important story about how people treat each other. That evening, as Clint drove home along the Pacific Coast Highway, watching the sunset over the ocean, he thought about how far both projects had come in just a few months. What had started as a simple flight had turned into something much bigger. The $500 million lesson was just beginning, and Pacific Airways was starting to realize it had made a very expensive mistake when they bumped Clint Eastwood to economy class. 8 months after Clint Eastwood's uncomfortable flight in economy class, Hollywood was buzzing with excitement. Billboards for economy class lined Sunset Boulevard, showing Robert Johnson as a wealthy businessman squeezed into a middle seat, with the tagline, "First class isn't a seat. It's how you treat people." In his home in Carmel, California, Clint sat on his porch drinking coffee and reading the morning newspaper. The entertainment section featured a full-page article about the upcoming premiere of Economy Class. Critics, who had seen early screenings, were calling it one of the best films of the year. Some were already mentioning Oscar nominations. Clint's phone rang. It was Maya, "Good morning, Clint," she said, sounding excited. "Have you checked your email yet?" "Just having my coffee," Clint replied. "What's up?" "Netflix wants to buy my documentary," Maya almost shouted. "They're offering $3 million for exclusive rights, and they want to release it the same week as Economy Class hits theaters." Clint smiled. This was exactly what they had hoped for. "That's great news, Maya. You deserve it." "I couldn't have done it without you," Maya said. When they watched the rough cut, they said it was one of the most powerful documentaries they'd seen in years. They especially loved the part where you tell your story. "I'm just one of many people who got treated poorly," Clint said modestly. "The strength of your film is that it shows this happens to everyone." After finishing the call, Clint checked his own email. There were dozens of messages from his team at Malpaso Productions, all sharing good news. Advance ticket sales for Economy Class were breaking records. International distribution rights had sold for record amounts. Major theater chains were requesting additional screens for the opening weekend. But one email caught his attention. It was from Thomas Reynolds, the CEO of Pacific Airways, marked urgent. The message was brief. "Mr. Eastwood, our company stock has fallen 15% in the past month as word about your film spreads. Ticket sales are down. Please call me to discuss how we might resolve this situation amicably." Clint closed the email without responding. Pacific Airways had created this problem themselves, not just with how they treated him, but with how they treated all their customers. The film wasn't about revenge, it was about showing the truth. 2 weeks later, Clint stood on the red carpet at the premiere of Economy Class in Los Angeles. At 85, he still cut an impressive figure in his black suit. Cameras flashed as he walked past cheering fans and reporters calling his name. "Mr. Eastwood, is this film really based on your experience with Pacific Airways?" one reporter shouted. "The film speaks for itself," Clint replied with a smile. "It's about how we treat each other in a world that too often separates people into first class and economy class." Inside the theater, Clint took his seat next to Maya, who looked stunning, in a simple blue dress. This was her first Hollywood premiere, and she couldn't stop smiling. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered as the lights dimmed. "Believe it," Clint said. "Your documentary premieres on Netflix tomorrow. By this time next week, everyone will be talking about both our projects." The film began and the audience fell silent. For 2 hours, they watched the story of William Howard, played by Robert Johnson, a wealthy CEO who gets bumped from first class and discovers how his own company treats regular customers. The parallels to Clint's experience were clear, though. The film never mentioned Pacific Airways by name. When the movie ended, the audience stood and applauded for 5 full minutes. Clint and the cast took the stage for a brief Q&A session. "Mr. Eastwood, what inspired this film?" a film critic asked. "Life inspires art," Clint said simply. "Sometimes you have to sit in economy class to see how the real world works." The audience laughed, many of them knowing the true story behind the film. Another reporter raised her hand. "Is it true that Pacific Airways tried to stop this film from being made?" "No one tried to stop the film," Clint answered diplomatically. "But I did receive some interesting phone calls. Let's just say some companies are more concerned about their image than about fixing their actual problems." After the premiere, reviews poured in, most of them glowing. Economy Class was called a masterpiece and Eastwood's finest film in years. Ticket sales for the opening weekend were projected to be over $50 million, an impressive figure for a drama. The next morning, Maya's documentary titled The Invisible Customer premiered on Netflix. Within hours, it was the most watched program on the platform. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of poor treatment by big companies. A hashtag, Economy Class Treatment, began trending worldwide. News channels picked up the story, running segments about both the film and the documentary. They interviewed people who had experienced similar treatment to what was portrayed in the projects. Some networks even tried to get comments from Pacific Airways, but the company issued only a brief statement saying they were committed to excellent customer service for all passengers. By the end of the first week, Economy Class had earned over $70 million at the box office, far exceeding expectations. Maya's documentary had been watched by more than 40 million people worldwide. Together, the two projects had created a cultural conversation about corporate responsibility and human dignity. In his office at Pacific Airways headquarters, CEO Thomas Reynolds stared at the financial reports on his desk. The company's stock had fallen another 12% since the premiere. Ticket sales were down 30% compared to the same period last year. The company's reputation score, as measured by consumer research firms, was at its lowest point in 20 years. "What are our options?" he asked his executive team, who sat nervously around his conference table. "We could try legal action," the company's lawyer suggested. "Claim the film defames our airline." "The film never mentions us by name," the head of marketing pointed out. "And Eastwood was careful to change enough details that we can't prove it's about us, even though everyone knows it is." "Besides," the chief financial officer added, "suing Clint Eastwood would be a PR disaster. The public already sees us as the villain in this story." Reynolds sighed deeply. "What about offering him something? A lifetime of free first-class travel? Naming a plane after him?" The room fell silent. Everyone knew those offers would be rejected, and might even make the company look worse. Finally, the head of customer experience spoke up. "What if we actually fixed the problems? What if we used this as an opportunity to change how we treat our customers?" Reynolds looked at her with surprise. It was such a simple idea, yet no one had suggested it until now. They had been so focused on their image that they hadn't considered actually addressing the underlying issues. "How would we do that?" he asked. "We start by admitting we were wrong," she said. "Then we make real changes to our policies, our training, everything, and we invite Clint Eastwood to help us do it." Reynolds nodded slowly. It would be expensive and difficult, but it might be the only way to save the company. What he didn't know was that the financial impact was already far greater than he imagined. Between the box office success of economy class, the streaming rights for The Invisible Customer, international distribution, and merchandising, the projects Clint Eastwood had inspired were on track to generate nearly $500 million in revenue. The $500 million lesson was almost complete, and in Part 5, Pacific Airways would learn it fully. 3 months after the premiere of Economy Class, Clint Eastwood sat in a comfortable chair in his production office, watching the latest news about the film on a large screen. The movie had now earned over $320 million worldwide, an extraordinary amount for a drama. Maya's documentary on Netflix had been viewed by more than 100 million people globally. Together with international rights, streaming deals, and merchandising, the projects had generated just over $480 million in revenue. But the money wasn't what made Clint smile. It was the changes happening because of their work. Jennifer knocked on his door. "Mr. Eastwood, Thomas Reynolds is here to see you." Clint raised an eyebrow in surprise. The CEO of Pacific Airways had requested this meeting, but Clint hadn't expected him to come in person. "Send him in," Clint said, standing up to greet his visitor. Thomas Reynolds entered the office looking very different from the confident CEO he had been a few months ago. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and there were new lines of stress on his face. The past 3 months had been the most difficult of his career. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Eastwood," Reynolds said, shaking Clint's hand firmly. "Have a seat," Clint offered, gesturing to the chair across from his. "And call me Clint." Reynolds sat down and took a deep breath. "I'll get right to the point. Your film and Ms. Rodriguez's documentary have had a profound impact on our company. Our stock price is down 40%. We've lost thousands of loyal customers. Our reputation has been severely damaged." Clint simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "At first, our board wanted to fight back," Reynolds admitted. "They suggested lawsuits, smear campaigns, anything to shift the blame, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important." He paused. "You were right." "About what?" Clint asked. "About how we treat people," Reynolds said. "I watched both your film and the documentary. I saw how we've been dividing people into those who matter and those who don't. I saw the real human cost of our policies. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Clint. "This is our new customer service plan. We're completely restructuring how we treat all passengers. No more overbooking first class. No more charging for water and economy. No more different rules for different people." Clint opened the folder and glanced at the documents inside. They outlined major changes to Pacific Airways policies, training programs, and company culture. "This looks comprehensive," Clint said. "It is," Reynolds confirmed. "And it's just the beginning. We're investing $50 million in staff training and improved services. We're redesigning our economy cabins to provide more comfort. We're creating a customer advisory board that will include people from all walks of life." Clint closed the folder. "Why are you telling me this?" Reynolds leaned forward. "Because I have a proposal for you. We want you to be part of this change, not as a spokesperson or in advertisements. We know you wouldn't do that. But as an advisor. Help us see our blind spots. Help us create a company that treats everyone with dignity." Clint studied Reynolds' face, looking for signs of insincerity. He found none. "And if I say no?" Clint asked. "Then we'll do it anyway," Reynolds said firmly. "These changes are happening with or without you. But we'd value your perspective." Clint was silent for a moment, considering the offer. Then he reached for his phone. "There's someone else who should be part of this conversation," he said, dialing a number. "Maya Rodriguez. She understands this issue better than anyone." 30 minutes later, Maya arrived at Clint's office. When Reynolds explained his proposal to her, she was skeptical. "How do we know this isn't just a PR move?" she asked. "Companies always promise changes when they're in trouble, but once the spotlight moves on, they go back to business as usual." "A fair question," Reynolds acknowledged. "That's why we want to be held accountable. We're proposing that you, Maya, create a follow-up documentary 1 year from now. Complete access to our company, our staff, our policies. Show the world whether we've changed or not." Maya looked at Clint, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. "I'd want complete creative control," she said. "Agreed," Reynolds replied without hesitation. "And I'd want to interview employees at all levels, not just executives," Maya added. "Absolutely," Reynolds said. "We want the truth, not a glossy version of it." Later that evening, Clint and Maya sat at a small restaurant near his office discussing Reynolds' proposal. "Do you think he's serious?" Maya asked, stirring her coffee. "I do," Clint said. "Sometimes people need a wake-up call. Our projects gave him that. It's strange to think that none of this would have happened if they hadn't bumped you to economy class that day," Maya said with a smile. "Life works in mysterious ways," Clint replied. "Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is not getting what you thought you wanted." 6 months later, the changes at Pacific Airways were becoming evident. The airline had implemented its new policies, retrained its staff, and redesigned its cabins to provide more comfort for all passengers. Customer satisfaction scores were slowly improving. The stock price had stabilized and was beginning to climb again. Clint had agreed to serve as an advisor, attending quarterly meetings where he provided honest feedback on the company's progress. Maya was deep into production on her follow-up documentary, The Visible Customer, which would show the airline's journey toward change. 1 year to the day after the premiere of Economy Class, Clint found himself back at Los Angeles International Airport. This time he was flying Pacific Airways again, at Reynolds' personal invitation. As he approached the check-in desk, the airline staff recognized him immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Eastwood," the agent said warmly. "We're honored to have you flying with us today." "Thank you," Clint replied, handing over his ID and ticket information. "You're confirmed in first class," the agent said, printing his boarding pass. "But I should tell you, our economy class has been completely redesigned based on feedback from customers. Many people say it's now the best in the industry." Clint smiled. "In that case, I think I'll try economy again. I'd like to see those changes for myself." The agent looked surprised but quickly made the change. "Of course, sir, though this time it's your choice." As Clint walked toward security, he passed a large advertisement on the wall. It showed a diverse group of passengers, young and old, business people and families, all being treated with the same respect by airline staff. The tagline read, "At Pacific Airways, everyone flies first class." Later, as the plane took off, Clint looked around the economy cabin. The seats were wider, with more legroom. The flight attendants treated every passenger with the same courtesy. When they served drinks, water was free. The passenger next to him, a young mother with a baby, was given extra attention and assistance. Clint closed his eyes and smiled. The movie and documentary had now generated just over $500 million in revenue, but the real value wasn't in the money. It was in the changes they had inspired. Sometimes, the best response to poor treatment isn't anger or revenge. It's shining a light on the problem and offering a better way forward. That was the real $500 million lesson. A lesson about human dignity, about treating everyone with respect, and about the power of storytelling to change the world. As Clint Eastwood had shown throughout his long career, sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that make us see ourselves more clearly. And sometimes the most important journeys aren't from one place to another, but from one way of thinking to a better one.